The points that have been made by previous speakers, I completely endorse. In many ways, you've shot my fox. The things I was going to say, you already said, but I'll try to bring a little texture from a very small country on the edges of Europe called Scotland. It has an extraordinary political position, illustrated as recently as 24 hours ago. The Prime Minister of the UK visited the leader of the Scottish Parliament. There was a very large, unwelcoming reception outside the official residence of the leader of the Scottish government, called Bude House in the centre of Edinburgh. And many of the people there were holding Palestinian flags. And the sad thing is, we've always kind of prided ourselves on being leaders in democracy, and leaders traditionally will turn up outside number 10 in London and face the music, face their electorate. In this case, the principal speakers ignored that tradition and went in through the back alley at the back of the building, unwilling to face a hostile crowd. So there is, in the UK, quite a split between the establishment and the activists. And sadly, one of the underlying factors is something that will cause, I think, probably a lot of controversy if I were to say it in public here. But if you look at the work done by Edward Said on Orientalism, there is no doubt within the Scottish community, they regard the Israelis as displaced Europeans and Arabs as being not worthy of their support. There is a deeply entrenched form of under-the-table racism, I'm afraid, in Scotland, which is, I'm ashamed to say that that's the case. So how can that be undone? Well, the first thing is education. No child sitting in a classroom in Scotland, or for that matter in England, is ever taught anything about the Balfour Declaration. They know nothing about the meaning of the word Nakba, certainly no knowledge of the Six-Day War. It is a lobby which is extraordinarily powerful. The number of British Jews is quite tiny, but the power that they yield is immense. And that's one of the reasons why we're not succeeding in making progress. And already after 9-10 months of this unfolding tragedy, we're beginning to see compassion fatigue. The number of people turning out every week on demonstrations is not sustainable unless there are results. So what can a small nation do? A small nation can pick the low-hanging fruit. We have a fantastic tradition of education, and particularly medicine in Scotland. There are ways of making links that we should use far more forcibly than we are. We have to get civil society behind us, and that's difficult. Scotland has been in the forefront of religious education throughout Europe for a long time. The impact of some of the finest speakers has impacted the way the religious life of Scotland is conducted. And yet, in our churches, you will never hear the kind of sermon that Munter Isaac delivered 6 months ago in Jerusalem, where he called a spade a spade. His sermon was based on lifting a doll from broken masonry. This was lifting the Christ figure from the ruins of Gaza. There will be no sermons delivered that I'm aware of in Scotland. So the church is not behind us. The government is fractured by an extraordinarily powerful lobby. It has to be broken. I think what we have to do, though, is look to the future. It seems at this darkest hour impossible to do that. But I'm older than most of the people I'm looking at. and I took part in the war in Cambodia as a medic. One of the most important things I saw there was the work of a French anthropologist that realized that the Khmer people were being destroyed because their culture was being destroyed. We have to make sure that the people of Gaza and the whole of the Palestinians, whether they're in the diaspora or not, keep their culture alive. We must honor the great philosophers like Edward Said. We must try to get education into our schools, but we're probably not going to make that in the short term. The other thing is, how do we rebuild? Yes, we can get funds eventually to restore sewage and buildings and rebuild schools. When you think children have not had a normal life for so many months now, this has repercussions as to how they will function in the future. There was, until it was bombed to bits, a very fine institute based in Gaza that looked after the mental health of children. This is our biggest task, to plan in some way to ameliorate the tragedy that is falling on these children. It's the longest piece of work we will have to do. How do we even think about a single state? I think we have to. Even now, when people will look at you as if you're insane to talk about that, there has to be some planning for the future. And it has to be some recognition that the two-state solution died a long time ago. And we have to devise a way of bringing pressure on a corrupt, rotten, fascistic government in Israel. And somehow we have to make them the pariahs that the leaders of the South African government were. South Africa won through the ANC brilliantly against a displaced European population that were determined to do it their way in the most vile and objectionable way. Israel needs to be shown to be just like South Africa apartheid. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Bishop Tutu. I'm going to wind up now and say, we have to have the courage to look beyond the shattering of small children's lives. And it's up to us to do it.